Muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Soy
Good morning
Christian
to all of
Crespo,
you.
director ejecutivo del Centro
I
CLEAR
am
para
Christian
América
Crespo,
Latina y el
Executive
Caribe.
Director of the
Les
CLEAR Center
saludo
for
desde
Latin
Santiago de
America and the
Chile.
Caribbean. I greet
Hoy
you
es
from
un día de
Santiago de Chile.
celebración para la comunidad vinculada al monitoreo y la evaluación
Today
en
is a day of
Latinoamérica y el
celebration
Caribe.
for the monitoring and
Hace 10 años,
evaluation
a hace
community in
10
Latin
años
America
celebramos
and the
la primera
Caribbean.
versión
Because a
oficial
decade
de la
ago,
evaluación
10
en
years ago,
México.
we celebrated the first version of the
En este
Evaluation Week in
lanzamiento para América
Mexico.
Latina y el
In this
Caribe,
launch event
queremos
for Latin
reconocer
America and the
y dar
Caribbean, we
el
want to
cierre
recognize
al conjunto de organizaciones y personas que han dedicado sus esfuerzos al fortalecimiento del monitoreo y
value and
evaluación en la
celebrate the set
región,
of organizations and individuals
especialmente
who have
a quienes
dedicated their
promovieron
efforts
la
to
Semana
strengthening
Nacional de
monitoring and
Evaluación,
evaluation in our region, and especially
monitoreos
those who promoted
africanos,
Evaluation Week in its
junto a los
beginnings.
queridos
Thank you very
colegas
much,
del Centro
colleagues.
para África
Together
Lusófona
with
y
our dear
Caribe
colleagues from the
y
Center for
Brasil,
Africa,
les damos la bienvenida
Lusophone
al
and Brazil,
lanzamiento regional de la Semana de la Evaluación
Clear Lab,
Glocal
we welcome you to the
Evaluation.
regional launch of the
Les
local
comento
G
ante todo
Assessment
que la
Week
traducción simultánea
2025.
está
First
disponible
of
y pueden
all, I would
seleccionar
like to tell
la
you that
opción en
automatic
Zoom
translation is
Translate.
available and you can select it in the Zoom options that are
Andrea.
at the bottom of your screen. Andres, all yours. Very complicated Christian.
Bom dia, boa tarde a todos e todas. Falo aqui,
I
saúdo
greet you here
vocês
from
desde
Sao
São
Paulo,
Paulo, Brasil.
Brazil. I'm
Sou
Andre
André
Portela,
Portela, o diretor do Centro CLIA para África,
the
Lusófona e
director of the
Brasil.
Center for Lusophone
E
Africa and
estamos muito
Brazil.
felizes e entusiasmados por
And we're
estar
so
aqui
happy and excited to be
todos
here
esses
together
dias.
and
Vamos ter uma
we hope to
ótima
have a great
conversa, um
conversation,
excelente debate que queremos destacar a importância do
an
uso de
excellent debate
evidências
that we
para
want to highlight the
monitoramento,
importance of using
estudo,
evidence for the
monitoramento e avaliação em toda a
strengthening of the
região.
monitoring and evaluation system throughout our
Para
region. But
iniciarmos
before we start this
esse
debate,
debate, eu gostaria de
I'd like to invite
convidar
Dugan
o Dugan
Fraser,
Fraser, que é o gerente de programa
who
do
is the
Global
program
Evaluation
manager of the
Initiative,
Global
a
Evaluation
instituição que
Initiative,
promove toda a semana de avaliação,
institution that
baseado
promotes every week of
aqui na nossa
evaluation, to give a
Thank you
small
so much,
word,
Andre. Hi,
contextualizing all of what
everybody.
we're doing here.
Dugan, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dugan Fraser. I'm the program manager of the GEI. I'm delighted to be able to be part of the team that's welcoming you to the regional launch of the Glocal Evaluation Week. I think the fact that we're having a big focus on regional dynamics is a major innovation for Glocal and for the evaluation capacity development community. It's very exciting that this week is being led by Clear LAC and Clear Lab with their close partners at OVE, the Evaluation Office of the Inter-American Development Bank, and with DVAL. For us at the GEI, we're very excited to see this regional dynamic getting really strong, and especially in a region like Latin America and the Caribbean, which has such a vibrant evaluation community. I just want to remind you that the GEI is a network. We're a coalition of organizations. We're based in Brussels, but our organizational members are all over the world. We have clear centers in Delhi, in Lahore, in Pakistan, in Dakar, in Senegal, in Johannesburg, in South Africa, and then, of course, the two fabulous centers in Santiago de Chile and in Sao Paulo. We ran the IPDET training program out of Switzerland, which this year, I hope you've noticed, is having its first decentralized delivery happening in Nairobi. I hope you're going to pay attention to that. We also operate the Better Evaluation website, which we're delighted to tell you we're in the process of updating. This is a taster of everything that goes on in the GEI, and next week an absolute delight awaits you. I'm going to hand back to Claudia, who is our wonderful organizer, and I hope you have a great session. Thank you so much. Over to you, Claudia.
Muchas gracias, Dugan. Buenos días, estimada comunidad de evaluación.
It is esteemed evaluation
y
community
el Caribe, y a quienes nos
from
visitan
Latin America and the
desde
Caribbean, and to those who are with us
Soy
today
Claudia
from other
Olivaria,
regions.
soy la
I am
coordinadora
Claudia
de la
Olivaria.
Semana Global
I am the
de
coordinator of the
Evaluación
Global
de la
Evaluation
Semana
Week from the
Evaluación.
Global Evaluation Initiative.
Hoy es
Today
un
it is my
placer
pleasure to
darles la
welcome you to
bienvenida a
this
este
regional
lanzamiento
launch
regional
of the week.
de la semana. Este evento cierra un ciclo de 5 lanzamientos que nos han llevado
This
desde
event
el nivel
closes a
global
cycle of 5
a las
launches that have
distintas
taken us
regiones
from the
con las que
global level to the
trabajamos
different regions where
en
we work.
conjunto con nuestros socios implementadores desde el GEI.
Together with our
Como
implementing
decían,
partners from the
al fin,
IG,
¿cierto? el debate con las valiosas perspectivas y los
allowing us to deepen and
que
expand the debate with the
encontramos en
valuable
Asia,
perspectives and
en
learnings that we
América
find in
Latina y
Asia,
también en las
that we found in
Américas.
Africa and today also in the
Hoy,
Americas.
en la Semana
As
de la
Christian has
Evaluación
said,
nace en América Latina y sus organizadores más
the week of
compromisivos
evaluation was born in Latin
siguen
America and its
activamente en
oldest and
esta
most
región.
committed organizers are still in this part of the
Para mí es
world.
un honor poder inaugurar hoy este espacio y también
That is why it is an honor for me to be able to inaugurate this space today and also to honor, as Christian did, these founding efforts of Glocal that are born in the region. In its 7 years, Glocal has convened thousands of events for mutual exchange and learning on monitoring and evaluation issues. This time GLOCA in 2025. We invite you to discuss, to debate and learn together about evaluation for a better future, thinking about environmental sustainability, inclusion, and peace. We have nearly 380 events that you can join to discuss these much-needed topics in today's world. And we hope to see you at each of the events that want to join us during the next week. That's all on my part. Go ahead, Andrew. Many. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you so much, Dugan. Undoubtedly. This will be a moment of conversation and reflection in which we will be able to discuss the common challenges we have in our region, to promote the use of evidence in decision-making. From the clear centers, strengthen monitoring and evaluation systems and the use of evidence, the work that moves us daily. Since this is a fundamental pillar to learn and improve the effectiveness of public policies, inform better designs, increase transparency and accountability and optimize the use of public resources. To talk about all these matters and all these positions that allow us to assess evaluation, we would like to invite a very cordial welcome to our main speaker of this day, the Undersecretary General of Planning of Ecuador, Mrs. Andrea Sánchez, who will tell us from her perspective, from the perspective of Ecuador, the value of monitoring and evaluation, both for learning and for better planning and linking with budget processes.
Aprovechamos nuevamente este espacio para extender nuestras congratulaciones al país de Ecuador por su muy activo compromiso en esta semana de la
We take this opportunity again to extend our congratulations to the country of Ecuador for its very active commitment in this week of the 2025 Undersecretary Ahead Evaluation. Well, thank you very much to all of you. For me, it is an honor to be able to accompany you in this week of the evaluation in this inauguration that is taking place. It is super. For us, the spaces are very important. For reflection that unite the entire evaluation community are very important, with the aim that we can have real policies, policies that reach citizens with this approach from evaluation. I'm going to start my presentation. I would like you to confirm if you can indeed see the pictures, if they look good. Yes, you see well. Thank you very much. Well, I'm just going to talk to you about the value of evidence. Strengthening monitoring and evaluation systems in Latin America and the Caribbean, specifically in the experience of Ecuador. This is the content of the presentation. I am going to talk a little about the regulatory framework of Ecuador, which to give us an idea of how we have been structured, the decentralized national system of participatory planning, the public policy cycle, our monitoring and evaluation subsystem, the process we do, of monitoring and evaluation, the lessons learned and the challenges we still face. Well, in the regulatory framework we have the Constitution of the Republic of Ecuador, which establishes that the state plans the development of the country. This development must be anchored in the national objectives and the principles established in the Constitution. In the same Constitution there is talk of a decentralized national system of participatory planning, which is precisely what is going to be planning for development. It is made up of a National Planning Council. This National Planning Council is made up of different levels of government. The central government. The municipalities also have active citizen participation and there is a technical secretariat that coordinates it.
También establece que el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo es el instrumento máximo de planificación nacional al que se anclan los programas.
Article 280 of the Constitution also establishes that the National Development Plan is the maximum instrument of national planning to which programs, policies and projects are anchored. The budget allocation is very important. They have to be anchored in the National Development Plan and it is mandatory to comply with it within the public sector. We have the Organic Planning Code that establishes that the Technical Secretariat of the National Decentralized Planning System. It is precisely the governing body of planning. In this case the National Planning Secretariat of Ecuador, which is precisely where I belong. Within the decentralized national planning system, as I was saying, there are several actors that participate. There are the entities that are the formulators and executors of public policy from this system. We also propose instruments and processes that delimit the execution of the action. From this system, from the National Planning Secretariat.
Y justamente los objetivos del Sistema Nacional Descentralizado de Planificación Participativa es que se puedan cumplir los derechos.
And precisely the objectives of the decentralized national system of participatory planning is that constitutional rights can be fulfilled, such as access to education, access to health that is linked to the exercise of other rights, such as access to housing. And all this generates precisely the development of the country. Coordination of planning also has to be at all levels of government. Both at the national level and at the provincial, cantonal and parish levels, in accordance with the territorial organization that we have in El País. And the objective is also for public policy to achieve tangible and intangible impacts. In general, the objective of the decentralized national planning system is to organize planning for development and territorial planning. We are very much framed in the cycle of planning and public policy. So the structure of the National Planning Secretariat is under this logic. Taking into account that public policy is short, medium and long-term actions that aim to respond to the needs of the population, to respond to the problems of the population. And what we do is a formulation of public policy, which is carried out by the Undersecretary of National Planning. Once the public policy is formulated, coordination must be made for its execution and implementation. This is done through the ministries that execute public policy and during this process. During the implementation process, follow-up is carried out by the Undersecretary of Planning to be able to identify critical knots. And also the evaluation through the Undersecretary of Evaluation, so that we can also make more in-depth analyses of what these critical nodes have been, because it has happened if they have. If they are. If they are repeated or also if we can know good practices, and these good practices can be used in other public policies. None of this would be possible without the information for planning. We collect information through the coordination of information from the National Planning Secretariat. It is important to know the instruments of the National Decentralized Planning System. We have the National Development Plan that has a national territorial strategy that has territorial guidelines and guidelines so that they effectively have a territorial impact. And these have a national impact. There is a long-term vision that makes policies not of government, but of the state. The national objectives are proposed, which are precisely the development objectives and the investment criteria so that the budget is effectively allocated to these national objectives that are intended to be achieved. We also have strategic policies through which these national objectives will be met, and we set goals to be able to do monitoring and evaluation. Within these instruments we also have sectoral plans, which are plans that are carried out between several institutions. Such as security, we have the Ministry of Defense that manages. The Army and the Ministry of the Interior, which in this case is managed by the police. Then a security sector is formed and they have as a sectoral plan the institutional plans that are specific to each institution. We have differentiated territorial plans. For example, in Ecuador we have the Galapagos Islands that do not have the same logic as mainland Ecuador. So they have a differentiated territorial planning. The Amazon or the borders also have different territorial plans. With a different development regime and the development and territorial planning plans that are carried out by the municipalities. All of these have to incorporate human rights approaches. That is why we have national agendas for gender equality, for peoples and nationalities, intergenerational, for human mobility. That they have to be used in all the instruments of the decentralized national system of participatory planning. There we have our monitoring and evaluation subsystem. What is it exactly? This is made up of the National Planning Secretariat, as the governing body of this. The entities of the executive function, which are the ones that execute public policy. The decentralized autonomous governments, and we also establish instances of citizen participation. Well, the follow-up precisely allows us to monitor compliance with the National Development Plan, the sectoral and territorial plans, the instruments of the system, and the evaluation that analyzes the effectiveness, efficiency, relevance and sustainability of the National Development Plan and its planning instruments is also being made. All of them, both monitoring and evaluation, allow feedback back to the planning. And precisely this feedback is based on the data we have, and that allows us again, continue with the planning cycle. One of the examples we have of how we do or how we build and how we use the public policy cycle is when we build the National Development Plan, which we do with citizen assemblies. We have a law on citizen participation that already establishes as citizen organizations that they effectively contribute to the National Development Plan. The sectoral ministries, which are the executors of public policy. Within each sectoral ministry, we have a planning area that is the counterpart of the National Planning Secretariat, and allows these policies of strategies and goals to be formulated. We also work with the academy, with civil society in general and the decentralized autonomous governments. The important inputs for us is the government plan of the president-elect, because it is precisely the plan that the citizens have chosen, and based on that document, the National Development Plan implements so that what the campaign promises are fulfilled. We also have long-term policies, or also what is established in the Constitution. Does it establish the fulfillment of rights such as access to health and education? And so we have to see that this is effectively fulfilled, and we have these monitoring and evaluation reports of the National Development Plan, which once again allows the cycle to be fed back from the actions we carry out from monitoring and evaluation. We also align with the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, to achieve the global objectives that we have at the moment. The National Development Plan is the national plan for the new Ecuador 2024-2025, which is made up of 5 axes: the social axis, the economic development axis, the infrastructure axis, the institutional axis, and the risk management axis. We have a structure of how the state works. In Ecuador we have made each of the axes of the National Development Plan, according to this structure of the state. Which allows us to identify which actions are going to be carried out from each state portfolio or which are also going to be carried out jointly within this state portfolio, because we have seen the need for the public force to be able to do so. This comes not only in a reactive way, but also preventively, with the joint work with other ministries such as our Ministry of Social Development, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, precisely so that we can have social policies, intersectoral.
Tenemos el ciclo de la evaluación que nosotros hacemos específicamente en los proyectos de
We have the evaluation cycle that we do specifically in investment projects.
programas y proyectos de inversión que lo denominamos el plan anual de evaluaciones.
We make a selection of investment programs and projects that we call the annual evaluation plan. To make this annual plan of evaluations, we establish a methodology for selecting investment projects. According to this methodology, a ranking is established, and from the ranking this annual evaluation plan is made. After the annual evaluation plan is approved by the National Planning Council, we have a guide for the evaluation of public policies where the design of these public policies is established, which is going to evaluate who is going to participate in the process. Then the execution of the evaluation of the public policy begins through the collection of the information from the analysis. The findings and the results obtained are reported from the findings. And then, finally, with the results, action plans are made. So, what is intended through this annual plan of evaluations and each of the evaluations that are carried out on investment projects is that there is feedback on our annual investment plan, because from the National Planning Secretariat we give priority opinions to investment projects. We made methodological changes in the methodology to define this annual evaluation plan. Before, both methodologies were seen, both the previous and the current one. They do look at budget execution. A change was made in the percentage because if there was a budget execution of less than 10%, a result evaluation was made greater than 10%, and if it was lower, a design evaluation was made.
Miramos proyectos que durante toda la vigencia hayan tenido una ejecución presupuestaria mayor.
Now we look at projects that during the entire term have had a budget execution greater than 25%, accumulated budget execution greater than 25%. Before, the fulfillment of physical goals was not analyzed. What are physical goals? The investment projects aim to build hospitals, schools, and roads. That is the effective fulfillment of my project. That is metaphysics, the one I want to reach. Before that, it was not considered for evaluation. Now we do make an effective evaluation for the selection. We do see that there is a fulfillment of the physical execution of these goals. Some old projects also in the previous methodology I saw that they are not projects in which they have exceeded 7 years of age. Now we do analyze them because doing a specific analysis of the annual investment plan, we saw that several projects had a validity of 13 years, 10 years, 12 years. And we also saw that in some cases they had or had not met their physical goals. And that it was important to analyze if it was necessary to extend the priority opinions. That is why this criterion was included. Now we also consider projects that are completed and in execution to be of the project status. Why in execution? Also because we can make partial evaluations with the aim of provide timely alerts while the project is underway. In execution, before, there was randomness in the selection. Now we choose one project for every one of the cabinets that I initially showed them. And what we do see is that the same institution is not repeated. We don't have a very big team either. But that is why we try to make sure that we can make a complete analysis of all the sectoral cabinets that we have. We had expert criteria, also in accordance with an ECLAC methodology, where the relevance is established, the information that is available. If there is any similarity with some projects already evaluated, and that allows us to establish this ranking of the projects to be evaluated. Among the lessons learned that we have in these monitoring and evaluation processes has been permanent monitoring. We have periodic meetings with the institutions with the aim of knowing what their interests are. This has been very important for us. That precisely allows us to generate alerts because several of the procedures stop at administrative issues. And it is very important to make interinstitutional coordination. To work with the Ministry of Finance and with other institutions to unblock these critical knots. We do the quantitative and qualitative analysis. We have included this analysis to not only see the budget execution, but also to determine what the problems have been along the way, to see what these critical nodes have been with the objective of give these. It is to make corrective measures taken along the way and in time. Continuous improvement has allowed us to have a better index of national capacities in evaluation, which is from the INCE, in such a way that we have gone from an ILCE of 3.54 in 2022 to an index of 4.98 in 2024. We still have many challenges in El País, such as the use of devaluations. Indeed, we still have to create this culture of evaluation, where institutions use the devaluations that are carried out and in decision-making. We have a systemic impact assessment as well. That we can effectively measure the results beyond the fulfillment of methods. See that it is effectively generating an impact on the population. We have also taken some corrective measures with the institutions in the formulation of their goals and its indicators, but we're still working on improving that process. Tenemos una guía de formulación de políticas públicas desde la Secretaría Nacional de Planificación. We are also making a guide for monitoring public policies because we have a guide for the formulation of public policies from the National Secretariat of Planning. We validated and approved. But no, then there was no effective follow-up of these public policies. So with the support of UNICEF, the Secretariat, National Planning is in the development of this guide for monitoring public policies. It is a challenge that we still have. But we have also begun the territorialization of evaluation. The information has been a bit complicated to have at the territorial level. But we do firmly believe that disaggregated information is super important to effectively determine what its incidence is at the national level.
trabajando para fortalecer las capacidades de los gobiernos autónomos descentralizados y también de las instituciones a nivel global para poder hacer una evaluación de sus planes con esta pertinencia territorial. Y
And
bueno,
we are
en
also working to
general
strengthen the
estamos tratando
capacities of
de
decentralized
crear
autonomous governments and
actuarios
also of
nacionales
institutions at
de
the global level
evaluación.
to be
Es
able
por
to
eso
evaluate their
que
plans with this
con el
territorial
apoyo de
relevance.
ONU
And
Mujeres
well,
y de
in
Vaessen,
general,
hemos
we are trying to
desarrollado una
create this
guía de
institutional
evaluación
culture of
continua con
evaluation.
enfoque
That
en
is why, with the
jóvenes,
support of UN
desarrollo
Women and
humanos,
VAL, we have developed the guide for the
feminicidio,
evaluation of
podamos
public
tener
policies with a
políticas
focus,
públicas
gender and
más
human rights, so that we
inclusivas.
can have more inclusive
Les
public
comparto
policies.
un QR de nuestra semana de evaluación en el Ecuador. Tenemos 13 eventos simultáneos que se van a hacer de
I
forma
share with you
virtual
our one
y
QR of
de
our
forma
evaluation
presencial.
week in
En el
Ecuador.
QR van a
We
poder
have 13
encontrar la
simultaneous events that are
agenda,
going to be held
quiénes van a
virtually
ser
and in person at
efectivamente
the
todos los
QR.
eventos
They will be
y
able to
hemos
find the
desarrollado
agenda.
una
What
página
are they
web
going to be?
específica
Effectively,
para la
all
semana
events.
de
We have
evaluación
developed a
del
specific
Ecuador,
website for
que
the
es
Dell Ecuador Evaluation Week, which is precisely Ecuador Evaluation Point.
y allí también
GOB
van a
Point.
poder encontrar
CY
toda la
Point. There you will also
información.
be able to find all the
Muchísimas gracias.
information. Thank you so much. A lot of obligation.
Muito obrigado por sua apresentação sobre seu
Andre
trabalho,
Sánchez,
Andrea.
without a doubt one.
Sem dúvida, uma excelente apresentação e levanta
Presentation and
os
raises all the
pontos
points that
que o
a
monitoramento e avaliação deve ter e
monitoring and
precisa ter
evaluation system must have and
e a
its challenges.
gente, na nossa
And the people
iniciativa,
in our
temos
initiative have
essa
this
missão de difundir a cultura, né, de tomada de decisões
mission to spread the culture of
evidência-based. A
evidence-based
gente
decision making.
é muito feliz em
And people are very happy
saber
to know and
a
see
experiência do
experience
Equador,
from Ecuador,
né,
right?
e esses desafios que agora tem de
And these
estabelecer essa
challenges that now have to
cultura
establish this
institucional. E é
culture
por isso que
of
a gente tem
institutional
essa
manner.
conversa
But
aqui,
that's why people
e
have
para
this
essa
conversation
conversa,
here,
seu
is for that
trabalho, nós
conversation.
convidamos
Undersecretary,
3
we
panelistas
invite 3
que
panelists who will
irão
go
fazer algumas rápidas
make some quick
reações
reactions to this.
a esse desafio todo que o Equador
Challenge
agora
everything that
apresenta,
Ecuador now
né,
presents a
avançado
lot.
para
Advance to
enfrentar,
face
né?
them.
Nossos 3 panelistas
And our
são
3
Joseph
panelists are Joseph
Vaessen,
Vaessen,
assessor principal de economia do escritório de avaliação e
Chief Economic
supervisão
Advisor of the Bank's
do Banco
Evaluation and
Interamericano
Supervision
de
Office,
Desenvolvimento.
Inter-American Development IDB.
Também estamos felizes de contar aqui com a
We
participação
are
de
also
Jeanne
happy to have here the
Lafortune,
participation of Jeanne
diretora
Lafortune,
científica do Abdul
Scientific
Latif,
Director of
Jameel
Abdul
Poverty
Latif,
Action Lab para
Jameel
América Latina
Poverty
e
Action Lab for
Oriental,
Latin America and the Caribbean, Jay Chicken and
Jeanne também é
Jane.
professora titular do Instituto de Economia
She is also a full
e
professor at the
Universidade de
Pontifical University Institute of
E também
Economics,
contamos
Católica from
novamente
Chile.
aqui com a
And we are
presença
also happy to be here with your
da senhora
presence.
Camila
La Senora
Soares.
Camila
Ela
Soares.
é doutora em Administração Pública e Técnica em
Camila
Planejamento
holds
e
a
Pesquisa
PhD in Public
do
Administration and
IPEA
Technical
do
Planning
Brasil
and Research of
e
the
a Camila foi
IPEA of
também
Brazil.
diretora de
And
monitoramento e
Camila was also
avaliação do
Director of
Ministério do
Monitoring and
Planejamento
Evaluation at the
do
Ministry of
Governo Federal.
Planning and Budget of
Nós
the federal
faremos
government.
rápidas perguntas para
We will
contextualizar
ask
para
quick
cada um
questions to
deles, para eles
contextualize for each
poderem
of them,
exporem as
for them to be
reações
able and
e as
expose the
suas
reactions and
opiniões que têm sobre monitoramento e
their
avaliação
views on
no
monitoring and
Equador.
evaluation
Vamos
for the
começar
region. Let's have a conversation.
Joseph.
Start with Joseph.
Vamos explorar o valor da evidência na
We will
orientação
explore the
das
value of
políticas
evidence in
públicas
guiding
e
public
decisões
investment and
orçamentárias,
decisions,
né?
budgetary
Para isso,
decisions. To
propomos
that
2
end, we
perguntas
propose 2
norteadoras.
guiding questions.
A primeira é, em
The
contextos
first
de
is in
alta
contexts of
desigualdade, como
high
na nossa
inequality,
região, né, e
as in our
grandes
region,
restrições
and major
fiscais,
tax restrictions.
qual o papel que a avaliação pode desempenhar
What role can
na
evaluation play
priorização
in
de investimentos
prioritizing
públicos com base em sua efetividade?
public investments based on their
E a segunda
effectiveness?
pergunta, quais condições
The second
institucionais são
question is what
necessárias para
institutional
que a evidência
conditions are
gerada por
necessary for the
avaliações tenha peso real nas
Does
decisões
evidence generated by
orçamentárias?
evaluations have a real weight in budgetary
Joseph, muito
decisions?
obrigado por
Joseph,
estar aqui presente.
thank you very much for
Passo a
being here and I
palavra para
pass the
você.
word to you. Thank you very much, Andrea.
Muchas gracias, André, por esta introducción. Y antes que nada quisiera
This introduction
agradecer
and first of
al
all,
GEI y también a los centros CLEAR y al gobierno de Ecuador por la invitación a este
I would like to thank the GIY as well as the Clear Centers and the government of Ecuador for the invitation to this opening event of Goku in Latin America. And I send you a cordial greeting from the IDB's Prayer and Follow-up Office. Starting with the first question you asked me, Andre. What role can valuation play in prioritizing public investments based on their effectiveness activity? I have several elements as an answer. First of all, it should be noted that, of course, in a context of budgetary constraints, it is essential that there is better scrutiny of the efficiency and effectiveness of public spending. And the key question is how public policies can generate the greatest added value with limited resources. In this sense, I believe that the evaluation raises three complementary questions. Do we ask first as evaluators, are we doing the right thing? That is, in other words, political interventions respond to the needs and priorities of society. And how can we better know what those needs are? Then the second question of interest would be, are we doing things right? It works well. The public system has the capacities of the resources, the infrastructures necessary to provide important public services to the population. And what aspects should be improved to improve the efficiency, the quality of the provision of public services? And as we finally ask, are the interventions in which we are investing effective? Are they making a difference? And what are the desired effects, but also the undesired effects of public interventions? And as for this last question, the evaluation follows a, I would say, double line of thought. First of all, to understand which programs work and which don't, it's important to look at the existing evidence on the subject. There are currently many evidence banks that bring together information and experiences from policies that have worked in a variety of different contexts. However, is no guarantee that what worked in one specific context will have the same effects in another context, considering that existing evidence is a very important first step. Second, in assessing inflation, inflation should follow an approach based on program theory, i.e., the theory of change. So, does evolutionary thinking allow us to ask questions about what the path is? How do you use products or services in a program? They result in the changes that one, I would like to generate. And the evaluators are aware and analyze the data based on that theory of change. And in the end, this would allow us to conclude not only if they work, but also how and under what circumstances these programs work. And this is key to learning and decision-making, policies in the future. This like an answer element to your first question regarding the second question. What institutional conditions must exist for the evidence generated by the evaluation to have real weight in budgetary decisions? I also have several elements as an answer. The Undersecretary, Andrea Sánchez, has already presented a fairly comprehensive view of the elements that are needed for an effective educational monitoring system. And I would like to add that global perspective with respect to what he has already presented. First, we know that assessments are not conducted or used in a vacuum, but are always influenced by their environment.
Y nosotros que trabajamos en el área de desarrollo
And
de
we,
capacidades de evaluación,
who work in the area of
consideramos
evaluation
tres
capacity
dimensiones
building,
claves que determinan la producción y el uso
consider
de
that there are three
evaluaciones.
key dimensions
Primero,
that
el
determine the production and
entorno
use of
evaluante.
evaluations.
Segundo, las
First, the
capacidades
enabling environment. Second,
institucionales.
capabilities.
Y por último, las competencias
Institutional,
individuales
and finally,
para
the
el
individual
monitoreo y
competencies that are
evaluación.
needed for monitoring and inflation,
Y el
and the
uso
use
de
of
las
emulations to
evaluaciones,
go.
para ir al núcleo de la pregunta, es muy sensible a las capacidades institucionales. Y
Core of the
estos
question. It is very
capacidades se
sensitive to
refieren a
institutional
procesos,
capacities,
métodos,
and these
sistemas de
capacities refer to
evaluación,
processes,
asignación de recursos y también las interrelaciones entre las
frameworks,
instituciones
information
y
systems,
entidades para
resource
la
allocation, and
realización
also
de
the
la
interrelations
evaluación,
between
como hemos visto
institutions,
en el caso
entities to carry out
de
monitoring and
Ecuador.
evaluation actions, as we have seen in the particular case
Desde
of
la
Ecuador as
perspectiva
well.
de las decisiones presupuestarias, otro aspecto muy importante es el
From the
monitoreo,
perspective of
no
budgetary
solamente de
decisions,
recursos
another
y
very
productos
important
o
aspect is the
servicios, sino
monitoring,
también de
not only of
resultados.
resources, products,
Y
or
esto requiere
services, but also
capacidades
of results.
institucionales en la forma de instrumentos y prácticas para identificar cambios
And
en las
this requires
poblaciones o
institutional
grupos que
capacities in the
el
form of
programa
instruments and
atiende,
practices to identify
y
changes in the
procedimientos
populations or
también
groups that
para
the programs
informar y
serve, and
analizar esta
procedures also to
información.
report and analyze that
Y,
information.
como último, también mecanismos de coordinación
And
con otras
finally,
organizaciones. Y
also
este
coordination
monitoreo ya
mechanisms
puede
with other
informar
organizations.
las decisiones presupuestarias, pero
And this
también
monitoring can already
constituyen la
inform budget
base para
decisions.
realizar las evaluaciones. Y las evaluaciones explican el por qué las políticas generan
But they also
calidad
form the
y
basis for
resultados
circulations and
de acuerdo
equalizations,
con
explain why
los entes
policies
que
do or do not
atienden los
generate
programas
changes.
públicos.
The population served by public
Para que la
programs.
evidencia generada
For
en
the
las
evidence
evaluaciones
generated
tenga
by the
visibilidad
regulations.
en las decisiones
To have
presupuestarias,
a real
es
weight in
necesario
budgetary
que también
decisions.
existan mecanismos formales de articulación entre los sistemas de monitoreo y evaluación y los procesos
It is also
presupuestarios.
necessary that there
Esto
are formal
incluye
mechanisms for articulation between
normativa
monitoring and evaluation
operacional de
systems and
planificación
budget
interna,
processes. This includes the regulatory
igualmente
frameworks that
los
the
espacios
Undersecretary also mentioned,
institucionalizados de
and also the
diálogo
institutionalized spaces for
con el
dialogue
comité de
between the monitoring and
evaluación
relationship
y
units, and the planning system and the
de
political system.
planificación y el sistema político. Y por último, un aspecto muy importante
And
en todo ese
finally,
panorama es
a
la
very
voluntad
important
política,
aspect
por
in this whole
supuesto,
panorama is
y la
political will,
existencia
of
de una
course,
demanda
and the
clara de los
existence of a clear
tomadores de
demand from decision
decisiones.
makers.
Y esto también se relaciona un poco al fortalecimiento de las capacidades
And this is also
individuales.
related to the
Y ahí es
strengthening of
importante
individual
señalar que no
capacities.
solo los
And there it is
profesionales
important
de
to point out
monitoreo
that
y
not only
evaluación
monitoring
necesitan
professionals need
formación
training
y otros tipos de apoyo para su desarrollo
and other
profesional,
types of
sino
support for their
también,
professional
y yo
development,
diría
but
incluso en
also,
mayor
and I would
medida,
say, even more
los
so,
responsables
decision
de
makers.
la toma de decisiones. Y para concluir, una nota final, la
And to
subsecretaria
conclude, a
habló de
final
una
note, the
cultura de
Undersecretary
evaluación.
has already spoken of a
Cabe
culture of
destacar que
evaluation.
esa cultura de evaluación no se genera de un día al otro y realmente
I
requiere
think it should be
un
noted that this
esfuerzo
culture of
sostenido.
evaluation is not generated from one day to the
Comité
next and
muy
really requires a
preocupado de
sustained
actores
effort
para mejorar esos tres
on the part
aspectos,
of
el
multiple
entorno
actors to improve
habilitante,
those three
los procesos y
aspects:
las
the
prácticas
enabling environment,
institucionales
processes, and
y también
institutional
las
practices,
capacidades
and also
individuales.
individual capacities.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, man. Thank you very much, God, for your valuable exposure and for
y por recordarnos la importancia del fortalecimiento de las capacidades institucionales, individuales y de un entorno habilitante para continuar robusteciendo
recalling the importance of strengthening individual institutional capacities and an enabling environment to continue strengthening our national monitoring and evaluation systems. Now it's the turn of Jeanne Lafortune, with whom we will explore the value of evidence for learning and informed decisions regarding new public policies. To this end, we share with us two guiding questions.
La primera, ¿de qué manera los procesos de evaluación y el monitoreo
First, how can evaluation processes and monitoring become true institutional learning mechanisms?
¿Cómo podemos asegurarnos de que las lecciones aprendidas
And second,
sean utilizadas para diseñar o rediseñar programas o políticas?
how can we ensure that the lessons learned in evaluations are used to design or redesign programs or public policies in general, and are not just evidenced? Thank you very much for being here. I give you the floor.
Gracias, Cristian, por tus preguntas y gracias a la organización por ese
Thank you
libro
very much for your
excelente
questions
que
and thank you to the organization for that
enfatiza el
book.
rol muy clave que tiene la evaluación y el monitoreo
Event
en
that
nuestra
emphasizes the
región
very key
y
role that evaluation and
cómo
monitoring have in
podemos,
our region, and
digamos, ser aporte a
how
la
can we
discusión global
say be a
sobre
contribution to the global
nuestra
discussion about part of
experiencia.
our
Muchas gracias
experience?
también
Many
a
thanks also to
Andrea
Mrs.
Sánchez por su
Andrea
excelente
Sánchez for her
presentación y
excellent
los
presentation
avances
of
que
the
se han
progress that has been made
realizado
in Ecuador.
en Ecuador. Entonces, para pensar en tu pregunta,
So it
Cristian, yo
pays
creo
to
que
think about your
hay
question.
que, las
Christian,
dos
I
van
think the
mucho
two
de la
go
mano.
hand in hand.
Para que un sistema de evaluación y monitoreo sea
For an
parte
evaluation and
del
monitoring
proceso de
system to be part of a
aprendizaje,
learning process, we need first
necesitamos primero que se cambie la
that the
perspectiva
perspective on the
sobre
role of monitoring and
rol
evaluation
del
be changed.
monitoreo y de la evaluación, que no sea visto como un actor externo, que es un actor
That it has
castigado,
not been
que
seen as an
viene
external
a
actor,
sacar recursos,
that it
a
is a
hacer
punished actor,
evaluaciones del personal
that
que
comes to draw
pueda
resources,
entonces sentirse negativamente
to make evaluations
afectado
of the
por ese
personnel who will
proceso.
then feel negatively
Sino
affected by
si
that
puede
process.
partir incluso de la propia
But if it can even start
organización,
from the organization
tenemos
itself,
mucho mejor
we have a
posibilidad
much
que
better
se
chance that it will become a
transforme
learning
en un
process.
proceso de aprendizaje verdadero. Entonces, ese es el primer punto. Hay que
True,
cambiar
then, that's the
la
first point.
perspectiva y eso a nivel institucional
We have to
es
change
muy
the perspective, and that at the
mientras que
institutional
lo
level is very
mantenemos
important.
como una organización externa que viene
At the
y
institutional level,
entrega un
as long as we
producto,
maintain
vamos
it
a
as an
tener
external
menos
organization that comes in and delivers a
sensación
product,
de
we're going to have less of a
pertenencia
sense of
al
belonging to the
proceso
process,
y menos interés en utilizar lo que
and less
vamos
interest in using what we are going
obtener
to
del
see from the
proceso
process
como
as
un
a learning
instrumento
instrument for
de
the
aprendizaje
organization then.
para la organización. Entonces, en las experiencias que tenemos con
In the
partners
experiences that
en
we have
JBAL
with
en
partners in
general,
J-Ball,
ese ha sido un criterio muy fuerte de cuán involucrado es la contraparte
overall,
en su proceso de pensar en el monitoreo y la evaluación como algo que esa persona
that's
y
been a
esa
very strong
organización
criterion of how
quiere
involved the
y
counterpart is in their
valora.
process of thinking about monitoring and
Ahora, también hay
evaluation
que
as something that
pensar
person and that
en a qué
organization wants and
sirve
values.
esa
Now we
evaluación y
also have to
monitoreo.
think about what this and
Porque
monetary
si solamente
evaluation is
nos
for.
quedamos con cosas muy importantes de
Because
eficiencia,
if only we are
distribución
not
de
left with
recursos,
very important
etcétera,
things of
yo creo que
efficiency,
de nuevo
allocation of
no,
resources,
nos queda en una perspectiva de
etc.,
controladuría,
I think that again we are not left with a perspective
digamos,
of
de
controllership,
evaluación
of,
externa,
let's say,
etcétera.
of external
Entonces, yo creo
evaluation,
que
etc. So I think that if we transform that,
transformamos esa experiencia pensando en los beneficios que puede tener un buen sistema de monitoreo,
experience thinking about the
podemos
benefit that a good
traducir
monitoring
eso en
system
mejor
can have.
aprendizaje. Por ejemplo, si ahora
We can
estamos
translate that into better learning.
conscientes,
For example,
gracias a
if
un
we are now
proceso de
aware thanks to a
monitoreo,
monitoring process,
que
then whatever.
lo que hay algo en nuestro
Is there
programa
something in our
que falla
program that
en
goes wrong at a
una
very
etapa
specific
muy
stage? We are
específica.
going to have to.
No vamos a tener que hay una expresión en francés que dice
There is an
regar el
expression
bebé
in
con el agua
sentences
del
that says
baño.
to vote the baby
No
with the
vamos a
bathwater.
tener que
Yes,
eliminar todas las cosas buenas
we're not going to
del
have to
programa,
remove all the good
sino
stuff from the program,
solamente arreglar las fallas pequeñas que pueden ocurrir en el
but
camino.
only fix the small
Porque
glitches
si
that
nos
may occur
quedamos
along the
solamente
way.
con la evaluación global,
Because if we are not
teniendo
left with
muy
the
buenos
overall evaluation and we have very
no
bad
vamos a
results,
poder
then we will not be
aprender,
able to
sino que
learn,
vamos a
but we will
señalar
simply
que hay
say
algo que falla. Entonces, eso es lo
that it
importante
fails.
del monitoreo
Then,
y en particular de la evaluación de proceso para poder saber en qué cuello de botella estoy parado en mi
important thing about
proceso
monitoring and in
de
particular about the
programa.
process
¿Cuáles son las
evaluation to be able
cosas
to know
que
in
yo
which
puedo
bottleneck I am paid in my process of my
mejor?
program. What are the things that I can do
Por ejemplo,
better?
incluso si mi programa tiene un
And it may
impacto
be that even if my
positivo
program has a
interesante, yo
real,
puedo
interesting
igual
impact,
que
I may still want to
seguir
continue
mejorándolo a través
improving it through
de cosas
specific
puntuales.
things.
Entonces, puede puede ser que me está funcionando genial ahora porque tengo
So it could be that it's
una
working great for me
gestión
now because I have a
magnífica.
magnificent
¿Qué va a
management.
pasar el día
What is
que
going to
aquello
happen the day it was
rota?
broken?
¿Cómo puedo asegurarme que su experiencia, su conocimiento
How can I make
no
sure that your
desaparezca
experience,
y que yo puedo así
their knowledge
seguir
does not
adelante?
disappear and that I can
Entonces,
move forward?
eso me parece
So,
que
that
son
seems to me to be
realmente los puntos clave para transformar la experiencia del monitoreo y de la evaluación de una
really the
experiencia
key points to transform the
castigadora o
experience of monitoring
a
and
una
evaluation from a
satisfacción
punishing
interna
experience.
con motivo propio y que hace que podemos
External
así
experience to an
tener
internal
una
participation with its own
aprendizaje
motive, and that
interno.
makes it possible for us to have a
Eso
real
me
learning there.
preguntaba entonces, ¿cómo hacemos que esa experiencia
And Christian was
esa
asking me,
evaluación pueda
then,
transformarse en algo
how do we make that
que
experience or that
tiene
evaluation can be
impacto?
transformed into
Cuando
something that has
decimos
an
impacto
impact?
dos veces
Yes,
en
talking
un
about
contexto
impact
muy
twice in two
diferente.
different contexts.
Y para mí, el hecho de quién está motivando la
And for me,
evaluación
the fact of
es
who is motivating
yo
the
he
evaluation
tenido
is key.
experiencias donde entrego un reporte de evaluación de
I have
impacto
had
de alta
experiences where I
calidad
deliver a
a
high-quality
una
impact
organización
evaluation report to an
y se
organization, and it
entrega
is delivered
y
and
se
forgotten the
olvida
next
el
day.
día siguiente. Tanto que esa misma organización, 3 años después, me
So much
llama
so
de
that that
vuelta
same
diciendo,
organization, 3
¿podría
years
evaluar
later,
nuestro
calls me back
programa?
saying,
Y yo
I could
tengo que
evaluate
decir,
our
ya está
program and I have
hecho.
to say it's
Vuelven a
done.
sus archivos y van a encontrar la
They go back
evaluación
to
que
their
hemos
files
hecho.
and they will find the
Ese es el
evaluation we have
peor
made.
escenario,
That is the worst scenario.
donde realmente la evaluación sirve cero propósito. ¿Y por qué no
That where
funciona
evaluation really serves
exactamente
zero
en esa
purpose. And why didn't it work exactly on
circunstancia?
that one?
Una de las
Circumstance makes one of the key part
particularidades
is
el
the
cambio de
change of
equipo,
team.
¿sí? Entonces nosotros entregamos el reporte a un equipo
Yes.
que iba saliendo y
So we
eso
delivered
es
the
muy
report to a team that was
complicado
coming
en
out, and that is
una
very
región donde
complicated,
tenemos
particularly in the region where we have quite
turnover
relevant
bastante
turnover.
relevante, muchas veces motivado por cambio político, pero tenemos que tener
Often
esa
motivated by
tradición, como
political
decía
change. But we have to
Andrea,
have that
es una
tradition.
política de Estado y no una
As
política
Andrea
de
said,
gobierno.
which is a state
Y
policy and not a
entonces
government
hacer que la
policy.
evaluación no tenga
Yes,
ese
and this means
sabor
that the
político
evaluation does
es
not have that.
clave
That
para
political
que
flavor is
pueda
key for it to
tener
have
un
an impact.
impacto verdadero y
True and
durable
lasting in
en la
politics
política.
then than
Entonces,
the
la
institution that is in
institución que
charge.
está a cargo de hacer la evaluación no tenga un sesgo que se
If the
traduzca como
evaluation is made,
alineado
it
con
does not have a bias that
gobierno A
translates
o
as is
gobierno
aligned
B.
with the government to the
Pero yo
government
creo
P.
que
But I
más
think
que
more than
eso,
that.
hay que también entender, y eso es algo que puede
You also
costar
have
a
to
veces
understand,
al
and that is
mundo de la
something that can
evaluación,
sometimes cost the world of
que
evaluation.
las personas que están implementando y actuando en el mundo político tienen otros objetivos que solamente los objetivos de saber si la plata se
That the
está
people who are
gastando
implementing
bien.
and acting in the political world have other
Hay
objectives than just the
objetivos de
objectives of knowing if the
buscar
money is being spent well.
acciones
There are
del gobierno,
objectives
de
of
cualquier
showing actions
gobierno,
of the
en
government
su
of any
área de
government in its area
competencia.
of
Y
interest.
entonces, a veces, cuando eso es la motivación
And then,
principal por la existencia de
sometimes,
un programa
when
y
that's the
no
main
su
motivation for a
impacto,
program to
no
exist
es
and not
muy
its impact,
sorprendente que esos programas no reaccionan
isn't it
a la
very
entrega
surprising
de
that those
información.
programs don't react to the
Y
delivery of
entonces ahí
information?
yo creo que es súper importante la
Yes.
selección de los programas en
And
los
so I
cuales
think that the selection of the
hacemos
programs
la
in which we do the
evaluación.
evaluation is
Si
super
no hay
important.
interés de parte de la implementadora o de incluso
If there are no
los
inputs on the part of
actores
the implementer
políticos
or even the political actors
de reaccionar porque queremos hacer tal programa irrespectivo
to react
de
because
su
we want to make
impacto
such a
verdadero,
program and
porque
respective of its
necesitamos
true
mostrar
impact,
presencia,
because we need to
es
show
parte de nuestro
presence.
programa,
It's
son
part of our
nuestra línea
program. They're
directriz.
our guideline. So
Entonces
I
yo
think
creo
it's
que es
better to
mejor
focus.
enfocarnos en programas que no tienen esa característica y eso significa
In programs that do not have that
involucrar a
characteristic,
gestores y los
and that means involving
implementadores al
managers and
momento de
implementers at the time of
seleccionar los
selecting
programas.
programs.
Yo creo que
I
eso
think that
para
for
mí
me
ha
that has
sido
been a
un
very key
mensaje
learning
muy clave
in the
en
way we
la
can
manera que
transform.
podemos transformar
Evaluation in action.
La evaluación en acción. Y solamente para
And just to
terminar de
finish,
decir que
I think
eso
that makes it much easier.
facilita muchísimo la experiencia que podemos tener. Entonces,
The
cuando
experience we
uno
can have then when there is a
se
counterpart who is
involucra
involved
desde
from the
el
beginning.
inicio, se facilita la evaluación de impacto, porque sabemos que es
Impact
difícil hacer
assessment is
evaluación de
facilitated
impacto,
because
pero
we know that it is
la
difficult to do
contrapartida
impact
realmente
assessment.
motivada a aprender,
Evaluation.
podemos
But if the
juzgar
counterpart is
ya
really
desde el
motivated to
inicio y no
learn,
ex post, 3 años después que el programa termina,
we can
llegando
play
a
from the
hacer
beginning and
evaluación
not
de
X's
impacto.
3
Entonces,
years after the
podemos
program ends up
involucrar a
reaching that
actores
evaluation.
desde el
So,
inicio,
if
vamos
we
a
can involve
poder
actors from
hacer
the beginning, we will
mejor
be able to do it.
evaluación porque vamos a poder llegar a un punto inicial.
Better evaluation
Y
because we will be able to reach an initial point and thus transform that, and if the evaluation
impulsada por las personas que están implementando el programa,
be driven by the
también
people
mi
who are
experiencia
implementing the
es que es
program.
mucho más fácil de transformar el programa a
Also, my
través de la
experience is much
aprendizaje,
easier to
porque
transform the
es
program as a result of
automotivado
learning,
de ellos, y entonces una vez que tú le
because it is
entregas la
self-motivated by them,
respuesta,
and then,
muchas
once
veces
you
lo
give them the
implementan
answer, they often
inmediatamente.
implement it very
Y el
quickly.
tercero es que
And the
sí
third is
hay
that,
una
yes,
diferencia que
there is a
hay que
difference that
entender
must be
entre un
understood between the
privado
private world
y
and the
un
world.
público. Muchas veces los actores de la sociedad civil o de firmas, de empresas, pueden transformar sus programas
Large
mucho más rápidamente en respuesta a
civil
la
society
evaluación.
actors
Y
or
el
firms
sector
can transform their
público, y
programs
porque el
much more
sector
quickly in
público no puede
response to
hacerlo,
evaluation than the
porque
public
hay
sector cannot,
barreras
because
a
the
nivel de
public
hay que
sector does
cambiar la
not want to
ley,
do
hay que
it,
cambiar
but
el
because there are
reglamento, hay
barriers at
que...
the level of the law.
Y eso tenemos que
The law
tener
must be
eso en
changed,
cuenta
the
también en
regulations must be
nuestras
changed, and we have to take that into
recomendaciones
account in our
y
actions as
entender
well.
que esos procesos se van
Recommendations
a
and
tardar
understand that these
mucho,
processes
pero
are
que
going to
pueden
take
tener
longer,
efectos más
but that they can
verdaderos,
have truer and more
duraderos, si
lasting
logramos
effects if we
hacer
want to
cambiar la
change the
ley, si
law if we
logramos
manage to
hacer
do
cambiar
so.
el
Thanks to
reglamento, eso
isolation, this can have a
puede
very
marcar
important
un punto
impact.
muy importante. Eso
That,
espero
Christian,
haber
I hope I have covered the
trabajado lo que
topics that you asked
podía
me
en
for.
esto.
Very complicated without salichis.
Muito obrigado, Jeanne. Excelentes
Definitions.
pontos, intervenções.
The case.
O caso, né, o ponto principal de que monitoramento e
The main
avaliação
point of which
através de
monitoring and
sistemas de
evaluation through
monitorização
systems
é
of
processo de aprendizado e
monitoring and
aprendizado
evaluation
institucional.
is a process of learner is an
Isso, de fato,
institutional
eu
learner,
acho
and that in fact
a
is.
mensagem principal, né,
I
que
think the main
nós
message that we should have is
muito
very
bom
good to have.
ter
Have
escutado
listened to your
suas
views on
reflexões
that.
sobre isso. Nós vamos passar agora para
We are now
nossa
going to move on to our last panelist, to Camila,
e nós propomos para Camila
in which we
ter
propose
agora
for
uma
Camila to now have a
perspectiva.
more
Ela vai
perspective,
discutirmos a avaliação e o
broad to
monitoramento
discuss evaluation and
da
monitoring from the
sociedade.
point of view of
Propomos duas
society.
perguntas para
So,
Camila.
we propose 2 questions for
A primeira
Camila.
pergunta
The first question
qual
is,
é a
what is the
relevância,
relevance, Camila,
você atribui ao monitoramento e avaliação como
that you attribute to
ferramentas de
monitoring and
prestação de
evaluation
contas
as tools
e
for the provision
transparência
of
para a
accounts and
sociedade como um
transparency
todo?
for society as a
E
whole?
a segunda pergunta, como você percebe o potencial do
And the
uso de
second
evidências
question
para
is, how do you
tomada de
realize the
decisão?
potential of using evidence in taking
Muito obrigado por
decision?
aceitar nosso convite
Camila,
de estar aqui
thank you very
conosco
much
nesse
for accepting our
diálogo.
invitation, being here with us in this dialogue.
Obrigada,
Thank
André.
you,
Obrigada
Andre.
pelas perguntas.
Thank you for the questions.
Eu queria começar agradecendo
I wanted to
imensamente
start by
ao
thanking
André
Andrea
e ao
immensely,
Christian pelo
to Christian for
convite,
the invitation, parabenizing Dugan, Patricia, Claudia, by the Globo organization.
Eu já fui
And I
parte
was already
do
part of the Clear Lab
Lab,
team,
então já estive
so I have already been very
em
involved in
alguns
several
blocos
blocks.
aqui
It's a
nesse
pleasure to be
desafio
here
de
at this regional launch. So,
começar
I just wanted to
parabenizando
start by
a Camila
congratulating.
pelos 10 anos.
Congratulating you for 10 years and you
Tá
have me.
aparecendo uma
Something
coisa
comes
aqui, a
up here from the
tradução, deixa
translation.
eu confirmar que eu estou falando em português.
Let me confirm that I am speaking Portuguese and well. So I'll start by thanking you for the invitation, congratulating you on the 10 years of Globo and wishing you all a good week. Next week. And I also wanted to thank and congratulate their Undersecretary Andrea. I think it was very interesting to hear the experience of Ecuador. It has several similarities with the Brazilian experience. And very particularly interesting to see that you two are just as people have discussed here in Brazil, working to think about gender-trimmed evaluations. I just wanted to draw attention to that, and then ask if you can share this material.
Mas também foi prazer escutar o Yoss e a
But it was
Jeanne
also a
sobre
pleasure to hear
como eles fizeram,
IOCE
e
and
acho que
Jeanne
eu
on the points they made.
deixar pouco falando
They brought in, and I think I'm going to close a little bit by talking about the others, of the other utility, of evaluation in evaluation as a tool for transparency and accountability, or not. I think people have already heard a little bit here about the usefulness of the monitoring system and assessment for institutional learning and for internal government processes, of the planning budget allocation. And there the examples of Undersecretary Andrea were great. But I think evaluation has another benefit, which is transparency. And I think these are processes that are, which are interdependent. That feedback, and people have public evaluations and available in clear language for everyone is a tool, central for people to get closer to active public transparency, born, and there to allow society to achieve, de facto, monitor the implementation of public policies, so, to know in fact what is happening in terms of public policies. So, I would like to reinforce that point a bit. So, I think that the assessment, it has a very large role to play. When people think of evaluation and monitoring within the public system itself, within the public policy cycle, as Andrea said, but for more to the outside, born, it is a very important tool, but for her, in fact to be a tool of transparency. I think I am going to draw a lot of attention to this issue of communication. That there are clear reports in a language that is accessible, born, I think that's a big challenge. I think that what makes a great effort to bring reports and documents to a more accessible language. And when I was at SMA and the team that is there has still been a lot of work on translating reports in a simpler language and in documents that can be so absorbed and used in different places. I think that is a very important point for fact-checking to be a transparency tool. It needs to be translated, let's say so, for a language that everyone can absorb and use. More. In addition, people have monitoring and evaluation systems. Transparency also needs to be happening in other government spaces, right? So, and if the assessment is not taking place within public spaces and ensure that, is the data public? Ensuring that people have public and transparent information about the implementation of public policies is essential. So, draw attention to the fact that, as well as evaluation, it helps to ensure active transparency of government. It also needs that active transparency, especially when this evaluation is carried out by entities that are outside of the government, born. So, I would like to draw attention to that point as well. And I think that together, having structured monitoring and evaluation systems and having structured systems, structured transparency processes, people come closer to ensuring that there is social control, that the company is able to participate in the decision-making process, that society understands where the resources are going, as if the policies are being implemented. Do not limit. Make it clear that how different public policies are changing the lives of citizens. I think this has this point that strong evaluation and monitoring systems and strong active transparency processes will take the capacity of everyone to be more of a citizen, let's say so, born. And I think that all this increases one's own confidence in the public sector and in governments. I think these are very relevant points when people think about this connection of transparency and provision of accounts, and monitoring and evaluation. And here's Andre's second point. A little bit what would be the role of evidence in decision-making, right? And I think it's very interesting to people. And I think I'm talking about a place of being within the public service. The usefulness and monitoring and evaluation efforts that people make within public management, born, and now without talking about it out there, but talking about it inside. And people are like that. Decision-making often needs to be timely, right? And there I need to have evidence in a timely manner. There I think it is worth drawing attention to the point you mentioned in his speech, which is the existence of these large databases. What works? Of hot words that people have for a number of areas. That leads to me, on an important point, which is when people do monitoring and evaluation within public management. I think you need to be very concerned about having structured processes that are not responding only to the demand at that time, but they are constantly producing evidence, making an assessment, doing monitoring. On the other hand, ensure that these monitoring and evaluation efforts are always carried out through robust methodologies, reproducible and open methodologies, that people are very clear. How were these results achieved? So, I think those 2 points are relevant. People have a continuous process of monitoring and evaluation and evidence generation, on the one hand, and on the other. That's always based on a robust methodology, right? I think having those two things. When the decision maker needs to take a decision, he has where to turn and he has information there, born, public and available. I think I have talked a lot about the issue of transparency. I talked about the example of SNA, from the Secretariat of Monitoring and Evaluation here in Brazil. But I also draw attention to another example, which is from the Ministry of Social Development of Brazil, which has an open monitoring portal, that if you go in there, you can see the main social policies of Brazil, who is being, how many beneficiaries are, what is the resource that is being sent to these people, and other issues in this regard, and which also presents data and analysis concerning evaluations of such policies. I think this is a very interesting example of a monitoring and evaluation process that has tried to be more and more transparent to society, that society can consume. You can use that there and in that effort. A little bit of social control. I think that was it. Andre, thank you very much for the questions again. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Camila. Bye.
Muchísimas gracias, Camila, por tu exposición y por remarcar la importancia de la evidencia y de la comunicación.
Presentation and by stress the importance of evidence and communication for the sake of transparency and its link with evaluation. Wasn't who reads born this day? We have not reflected together on the value of evaluation. Have we? No. Have we? It led us to how we can link investment conditions, not budget. Investment, not budget. Jeanne, in learning, in decision-making, the part of amperencia, the Undersecretary no, from Ecuador showed us all that structure, not in a living national system, no? And what I think we are all going to agree on, is that evaluation reaches its greatest value, not when we finally link it to use, right? The use of the value of the evaluation decreases a lot. Have a given use. No, and if it is to improve, no. If that use is intrinsic, naturally we are in a much more favorable position, aren't we? And it was in the same week of the evaluation last year, at an event that we organized where representatives of those from countries such as Colombia, Mexico, Chile, Costa Rica and others were together, where I remember asking them, managers of national evaluation systems, what is the main challenge that you have in your system today? And like the Undersecretary, Andrea Sánchez, the first challenge she put in her presentation and the response given by all these participants, except one in the previous year, was the use of evaluation. We do not produce good evaluation in national systems, but it's hard for us to use it, right? And we understand that there is a communication challenge. As Camila told us, there is no political challenge of incentives, not as Jeanne put it to us. There are no technical issues as well. Not that the evaluation processes do not have to be linked to the attention of the budget, as I do not. And clearly we have as a challenge in religion to advance in these new critics that the Undersecretary mentioned to us. Not for this last part of the chain. We your presentation so that the evaluation reaches a port. Better decision-making and therefore, better public policies, right? And this is by doing so by strengthening individual and institutional capacities and the enabling environment. We want this energy that radiates from the center of our region, from Ecuador, reaches and accompanies us in all the spaces of our region in Guatemala, where they are actively pushing the national system of monitoring and evaluation, in the countries of the Caribbean, in Glocal Evaluation, that suffer the onslaught of climate change, and through monitoring and evaluation they are looking for better public policies with our colleagues and friends in the Dominican Republic and in Paraguay who are here. Are you in the process of merging your planning and budgeting areas, integrating them with evaluation, right? We want the evaluation to move towards being state policy. How comforting to see the experience of Ecuador. How do 2 years advance in your national index of evaluation capabilities? We have to continue advancing along these lines, so that this week of the evaluation is also a space for commemoration and celebration. Commemoration of Coneval's legacy of 20 years in Mexico. No. How important has the lighthouse that was Conval been for our region of the 30 years that the monitoring and evaluation system in Chile celebrates? Not of the efforts being made by the National Planning Department in Colombia to measure the use of the evaluation, and that are going to be exposed. In fact, this week also of the recent diagnosis that has been made by the CLEAR Lab of Brazil to measure the national monitoring and evaluation systems at the level. We have a lot to continue building a set in the use of evidence to strengthen monitoring and evaluation. And above all, to improve the quality of life of our compatriots, not only from governments, but also from civil society, from philanthropy, from the private sector, from national evaluation networks and voluntary associations. Surely together we will go much further in this effort together, and this week therefore, very welcome. We invite you to pour all this energy into continuing to build all this. Everyone, with, as they say from Ecuador, with everyone. Andres, the final words are yours. Thank you very much for being here with us today. Christian was very complicated.
Obrigado, Christian. Na verdade, só me resta agradecer da
I just have to
palavra
thank you for the words of thanks to
Secretária Andrea Sánchez por esta participação.
Undersecretary Andrea Sánchez for this participation and to toast us with all experience of Ecuador. We are here on the crook so that the Ecuador experience is very successful, and that serves and will certainly serve as an example for others, other governments in the region. And also thank the presence of our panelists Jeanne, Camila for her points, for its observations, comments and suggestions. Thank you very much. And finally, thank you to all of you who are here, have accompanied us in that dialogue, in that conversation. This is just the beginning of this week. I wanted to invite everyone to enjoy the hundreds of events that we will have in that week of evaluation GEI Luca 2025. So I hope find you in other forums like this from here on out. Thank you very much.